If you pass by First Unitarian Universalist on weekday mornings, then you're probably familiar with the site. For the past 5 years, 2 members of our congregation have been keeping a vigil on the corner of Fannin and Southmore. One of them bears a sign that reads, "Stop the Zionist Genocide," Micah chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. The other holds up signs denouncing racism and its resurgence or the cruelty of the current president. In keeping their vigil, these men, Craig and Thorpe, have been providing us in our city with an example of what it means to hold protest as a spiritual practice. Spiritual practices are those activities that we engage in over and over again to empower ourselves to connect more deeply with Spirit. Spirit, I've shared in the past, comes from the Latin spiritus, or breath. Spiritual practices, then, might be understood as those activities we employ to connect with breath, our own breath, which is always and forever connected to the breath of the Spirit of life. Each time we breathe, we renew our connection to the wider all of being. I invite you to consider what happens when you inhale and exhale. Your lungs take in oxygen. The oxygen moves through your body, binds with your blood, and is eventually expelled as carbon dioxide. The oxygen was made in the core of a long dead star. The same is true of the carbon. Each is part and parcel of the carbon cycle, which you probably learned about in elementary school. Every breath connects us to events almost infinitely distant in time. All of our inhales, all of our exhales are binding us to the respiration of the planet, the mass of vegetation that turns this planet into a living, breathing thing. This insight that the spirit of life and breath are one is ancient to Unitarian Universalism. You might recall that more than 450 years ago, Michael Servetus was burned at the stake for refusing to recant his belief that Jesus was a human being. You might not know that Servetus, a medical doctor, was the first European to discover pulmonary circulation. He believed that the divine spirit, the spirit of life, is produced in the lungs when air is inhaled and is combined with the elaborated subtle blood that the right ventricle of the heart transmits to the left. Spiritual practice, the awareness of the infinitude that our breath connects us to, is an opportunity to reconnect with the reality, as the Unitarian Universalist theologian Forrest Church put it, that the universe was pregnant with us when it was born. Such activities contain within them the potential of helping us undergo what I sometimes call the resurrection of the living, the waking up to the world as it is. The waking up to the world as it is. There is an element of this that those of you who are reading W.E. Du Bois's Black Reconstruction in America with me might find familiar. Writing in 1934, he began that magisterial volume with a then controversial claim. He stated that he composed his history with the assumption that African Americans in America and in general are average and ordinary human beings who develop like other human beings. Undergoing the resurrection of the living, experiencing a spiritual awakening includes the recognition of something so dear to our Unitarian Universalist tradition. We declare our association reminds us that every person is inherently worthy and has a right to flourish with dignity, love, and compassion. Craig and Thorpe have been sharing that value with Houston commuters for years. They started during the protests that followed the murder of George Floyd, and they've not stopped yet. When I asked Thorpe why he sits out in front of our campus at least once a week, he told me, "It is a reflection of my Unitarian Universalist values." Craig gave me a longer response. He began by sharing that it was a way to keep my frustration from overflowing before reflecting on the passage from Micah referred to on his sign. It reads, "Those who plan iniquity and design evil on their beds, when morning dawns, they do it. For they have the power. They covet fields and set them aside and seize them, houses and take them away. They defraud men of their homes and people of their land. Assuredly, thus said the Lord, I am planning such a misfortune against this clan that you will not be able to free your necks from it. You will not be able to walk erect. It will be such a time of disaster." It's a powerful passage. We could probably spend another couple of sermons probing it. Its author is traditionally held to be a Hebrew prophet who lived some 2,800 years ago. He predicted that Jerusalem was going to be destroyed by one of the neighboring empires. The coming devastation, the prophet proclaimed, would be brought about by God because, as the great 20th century Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel summarized his predecessor's message, rich men are full of violence and speak lies. Rich men are full of violence and speak lies. Craig is both a Unitarian Universalist and Jewish. He's greatly distressed by the war on Gaza. His invocation of Micah and his protest is a way for him to let the world know that even though there is no Jewish community in Houston that opposes the actions of Israel's current government, there is, in his words, a Jewish voice in Houston opposing that war. The prophet is a lowly man, Heschel wrote. Now, I'm not going to embarrass Craig further by comparing him to his ancient co-religionist, but I would suggest that both he and Thorpe provide illustrations of what it means to live as religious dissenters. To dissent is to disagree with an established authority. Unitarian Universalists are religious dissenters by definition. We disagree with the belief that religious values and theological perspectives can be fixed for all time in creeds or contained exclusively in scriptures. Instead, we reaffirm that truth shifts with the situation, and that for each of us there is nothing higher than the conscience. We might recognize with Micah that when it comes to the violence of the powerful, they do it, for they have the power. Probably also agree with the ancient prophet on another point. The reality that the powerful are doing something does not necessarily make it right. If you're in our sanctuary this morning or joining us online, I anticipate that you agree with me there. I suspect also that you have dissented from something in the past. You might be dissenting right now. Maybe you're here because you grew up in another religious tradition and found that you could no longer agree with certain of its teachings. Maybe you're here because you were raised Unitarian Universalist or with no religious tradition at all, and you dissent from what friend of the congregation, Omawali Luthuli Allen, names the existential absurdity of the president's America, the governor's Texas, the mayor's Houston, and the superintendent's school district. The absurdity being, of course, that those in power seek to govern as if, to hearken back to Du Bois, not everyone is an ordinary human being who develops like other human beings, but some are better than others. The powers and principalities of the hour are seeking to firmly reestablish racial and economic hierarchies that rest upon the lie that there are different races and different kinds of human beings. There is only one race, the human race. Children dying in Gaza, migrants that ICE is deporting to unknown fates as I preach this sermon. Each and every person on this planet is equally a human being. From the belief that one race being a human creation, is better than another, or that the wealthy, wealth being a human creation, inherently deserve more than everyone else, or the idea that one ethnic group, one linguistic group, one religious group, ethnicity, language, and religion being human creations, should have exclusive dominion over this land or that land, we, or the very least I, for in Unitarian Universalism there is no authority higher than the conscience, dissent. We dissent. To be a religious dissenter is to understand that protest itself is a form of spiritual practice. It is to recognize that transformative figures in our society have often been motivated by three interconnected theological principles. They can be found in the words of one of the most important practitioners of protest as spiritual practice that this country has yet to produce, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. He taught that the moral law, the affirmation we are equally ordinary human beings, is higher than human-made law. Reflecting on this while in jail in Birmingham, Alabama, he wrote, "Any law that uplifts human development or human personality is just, and any law that degrades human personality is unjust. When confronted with the disjunction between moral law and human law, in justice, it is our obligation, if we want to live a spiritual life," King thought, "to protest." Invoking the theologian Augustine, he observed, "An unjust law is no law at all." Finally, King believed that anyone could engage in a meaningful act of protest. Shortly before he died, he observed that everybody can be great because everybody can serve. His notion of service included dissenting from, protesting against any form of injustice that sought to subvert the ability of ordinary human beings, which is to say all of us, to fully develop our potential. So far, I've been reflecting on protest as a form of spiritual practice. I'm going to evoke Ella Baker now and take a turn to touch upon how it is also a religious practice. I make the distinction between the two in that spiritual practices connect us to the all of being, while religious practices connect us to a specific community. Put differently, religion, as I sometimes share, is what binds us together. Religious practices are those activities, as we say during the offering collect, that weave a tapestry of love and action. They are the activities that unite us to form a religious community. For the friends and members of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston, our religious practices include things like gathering together in person or virtually on Sunday mornings for worship, sharing fellowship in Channing Hall, or making offerings, whether of monetary donations or of volunteer hours, to sustain our life together. Baker understood that the spiritual and religious practices of protest have to be conducted together if they are to have any chance of being successful. Baker's name is not as well known as King, but like him, she was a foundational figure in the civil rights movement. Unlike him, she was skeptical of the centrality of charismatic figures in the work of social change. Instead, she lifted up the importance of the grassroots, ordinary human beings. In one of her speeches, she observed that hitting back was not enough. That is, the individual work of protest as spiritual practice is insufficient. Instead, she told her audiences, it takes organization, it takes dedication. Or to cast things in my own terms, we also need to hold protest as a religious practice if we're having a chance to making a contribution to what she named the struggle for human dignity and freedom. I was reminded of this on Wednesday when I participated in the first listening session of the Commission on the HISD takeover. I serve as co-chair of the commission alongside State Senator Molly Cook and State Representative Lauren Ashley Simmons. The rest of the commission is made up of nationally recognized education scholars and local community leaders. It also includes a student and parent representative. We gathered to hear stories about how the state takeover has impacted students. You can read something about that first meeting in last Thursday's Chronicle. The next meeting will be here on October 8th, and we'll focus on teacher experiences. But what we heard was bone-chilling. There were stories students told about being placed in the wrong classrooms, and teachers told about being instructed by district officials to break state special education law. We heard about libraries being ripped apart and librarians being fired, bathrooms without enough toilet paper, and students serving as translators for other students because the district is not providing non-native English speakers with appropriate support. The school superintendent has apparently banned the reading of full novels in classrooms in favor of the kind of short passages likely to show up on a standardized test. And here I want to go off on the issue of literacy in Texas. Our state ranks 46th in the country, and many a supposedly developed country, like, I don't know, Kyrgyzstan, has a higher literacy rate. But I'll save that digression for another Sunday. The general point is that the testimonies we heard were awful. Taken together, any of them could be thought of as an instance of protest as a spiritual practice. They were attestations to parents and, in some cases, students who were bearing witness to their own consciences, who were rejecting the state's immoral education law. Collectively, they became an instance of protest as a religious practice. Perhaps the most powerful moment, the most unifying moment, came when a 6-year-old, with her mother's permission and loving support, decided to share about how the takeover had impacted her school. Anyways, it was a group activity that knit us together, if only for an evening. Members of the Houston community who were outraged at the way the state takeover is destroying our city. The creation of community, this uniting of power over a shared ritual, listening to testimony, bound those of us present together. It is my prayer that it will be a small contribution to the great work of creating an education system that empowers all human beings in our city to develop their full potential. Protest as spiritual practice, protest as religious practice. I'd like to leave things there and return briefly to Craig and Thorpe at the close. And we will get back to them and their vigil momentarily. But before we do so, it seems incumbent upon me to comment on the horrific event of last week. Death is always tragic. It lessens the human community. Said not to know for whom the bell tolls, for the bell tolls for thee, observed John Donne. The death of a public figure deprives the world of a perspective, an instance of someone trying to share their understanding of conscience, and diminishes public discourse. The use of political violence, especially in a democratic society, to silence someone, to remove their testimony from our collective discourse, is always wrong. Free speech is the bedrock of democratic practice. And those who have launched a concerted campaign to cancel and dox anyone insensitive enough to make an inappropriate remark about Charlie Kirk's death are undermining it. Free speech only functions if we apply it to people whose views we find reprehensible, even ignorant or hateful. Once we start making exceptions to this rule for this view or that comment, the whole foundation of the idea collapses on itself, observes journalist Branach Marcetic. It turns out, he continues, that everyone has their own opinion about what is acceptable and what is beyond the pale. Now, it would be an understatement to say that I disagreed with the late Charlie Kirk on almost everything politically. I'm certain that we had radically different understandings of the moral law, what we would find searching our consciences. And I think that commentators like Ezra Klein, who claimed that Kirk was practicing the politics the right way, are off base. But I recognize in Kirk someone who was engaging in protest as a form of spiritual practice and as a form of religious practice, for he was profoundly motivated by his faith. And even if I object to how he practiced it, I think that he had a right to do so, to speak freely, and that that right is foundational to our society. I pray that those of his allies who are now using his death as an opportunity to try and silence political adversaries will come to understand this as well. Free speech as spiritual practice, here I return to Craig and Thorpe. Week after week, in the heat, next to the traffic, feeling the rattle of the passing trains, through the gentle miracles of their hands, to invoke the poet Martin Espada's understanding of the picket sign. They have shared messages from their hearts, testaments to the importance of the courage of conscience. They remind us that protest is not merely a political act, it is a spiritual and religious one as well. It breathes justice into the world. Religious dissenters, they encourage us to engage in our own vigils. These might not be on the corner of Fannin and Southmore or at public meetings. They might instead be the words we speak when we assert the right to freedom of speech, or the kindnesses we share when we affirm the inherent worth and dignity of all. Each breath we take, each act of conscience, connects us to the all of being and binds us together. So I leave you with this. Practice protest on the city corners, in your workplaces, in your classrooms, at city council, in Austin, at school board meetings. Practice protest, it's a spiritual thing. Practice protest, it's a religious thing. It is one way that as religious dissenters we can live into the legacy of our faith and claim the enduring power of conscience. It is how we provide a living testament to love, that ever radical belief that all ordinary human beings have dignity together. That it might be so, I invite the congregation to say, Amen.
Amen.